Most women are taught from a young age that endurance is virtue, that the more they tolerate, the more worthy they become. They are told to be patient, to be understanding, to give people another chance. Yet Carl Jung understood a darker truth. When a woman's patience becomes the mask for her fear of abandonment, she has surrendered her sovereignty. She becomes the caretaker of other people's comfort, even as her own soul grows restless and dim. But when she walks away, truly walks away, she steps into an archetypal power so ancient, it shakes the foundations of every bond she leaves behind. The act of walking away is not merely a physical departure. It is an inner severance, a psychic cutting of cords that once bound her energy to another's need. In Jungian terms, it is the withdrawal of projection. For years, she may have carried a partner's unintegrated shadow, absorbing their anger, soothing their insecurity, embodying their lost innocence. She may have been their healer, their anchor, their mirror. But in the moment she reclaims what is hers, she hands back all that weight. And when that happens, the one left behind is forced to face the raw parts of themselves they had hidden in her. This is why her departure feels so seismic to those who depended on her emotional labor. She is not only leaving, she is collapsing the psychic scaffolding they built upon her. And though they may curse her name, deep down they feel the emptiness where her energy once lived. The female shadow plays a pivotal role here. Jung described the shadow as the rejected self, the parts buried because they did not fit the persona. Many women are conditioned to banish their assertiveness, their anger, their refusal. They bury the instinct that says, enough, because it threatens the image of the good woman. But the shadow does not die. It waits. It speaks in dreams, in sudden bursts of rage, in the quiet numbness that comes from years of swallowing truth. And when a woman finally walks away, she is not becoming cruel, she is letting the shadow step into the light and claim her right to self-preservation. This is why walking away can feel like both death and rebirth. The death is the shedding of an identity that once felt safe, the self who stayed, who explained, who tolerated. The rebirth is the emergence of a woman who no longer negotiates for space to exist. She no longer asks for permission to protect her peace. She knows that the path ahead may be lonely, but it is never as lonely as living unseen in the presence of those who cannot meet her in truth. And to the world, this kind of woman is both magnetic and unsettling. Magnetic, because people are drawn to those who carry themselves without the need to please. Unsettling, because her very existence challenges the unspoken contracts of emotional servitude that so many rely on. When she refuses to play the role, others must confront why they ever expected it of her in the first place. This is not the coldness of detachment, it is the warmth of returning to her own center. She is no longer available for the endless cycles of proving, fixing, or enduring. She is available only for what aligns with the wholeness she has claimed. And in that wholeness, she becomes something dangerous to those who profit from her self-abandonment, a woman who will not stay where she is not honored. Walking away is not the end of the story, it is the beginning of one told on her own terms. And those who knew her before may not recognize her now, for she carries herself with the quiet authority of someone who has stood at the edge of losing herself and chosen instead to step back into her own skin. When a woman truly walks away, she is not running from the other, she is returning to herself. The outer world sees the act as an ending, but in the deep language of the psyche, it is a homecoming. Jung understood that the feminine principle is cyclical, not linear, that retreat is not weakness but the gathering of power. Like the tide that pulls back before it crashes with greater force, she withdraws not in defeat, but to reclaim what was scattered. For too long, her worth may have been tied to her ability to endure, to absorb, to keep the peace even when her own spirit was in rebellion. She may have told herself stories to justify staying. Maybe they'll change. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe this is what love is supposed to feel like. But beneath those narratives, the shadow whispered otherwise. It whispered in moments of quiet rage when no one could see. It whispered in the sinking feeling that came every time she silenced herself. It whispered in the ache that spread through her body when she imagined another year, another decade, living like this. The shadow is not her enemy. It is the guardian of her boundaries, the keeper of her truth. When she finally listens, the world around her shifts. What once looked like loyalty now appears as self-betrayal. What once felt like compassion now reveals itself as self-erasure. And in this moment of piercing clarity, the decision to walk away feels less like choice and more like inevitability. Those left behind may frame her departure as betrayal. They may accuse her of coldness, of selfishness, of giving up too easily. But these are the cries of those who benefited from her silence. They are the echoes of a system, whether in family, romance, or society, that feeds on the quiet compliance of women who fear their own power. When she walks away, she threatens not just one relationship, but the entire structure that kept her contained. And yet, this is where her transformation begins. In Jungian terms, she has shifted from the persona, the mask she wore to be acceptable, into the individuation process, where she becomes more aligned with her inner truth than with external approval. The woman who walks away is not simply leaving behind what harmed her, she is stepping into the raw unknown of her authentic self. It is in that unknown that her deepest power resides. No longer does she move according to the gravity of someone else's needs. No longer does she twist herself to fit the narrow space she was given. She moves according to her own seasons, her own tide. And in this, she becomes untouchable to those who once manipulated her through fear, guilt, or the promise of love that never came without a price. The world may try to test her resolve. Old wounds may call her back. The familiar ache of longing may tempt her to return to what is known, even if it is unworthy. But this is the trial every woman faces in reclaiming herself, to resist the pull of the past long enough to let the future take root. And so she learns to sit with the discomfort, to allow the emptiness, to trust that what she has released will be replaced by something that aligns with her whole being. And in this patience, she grows formidable, the kind of formidable that cannot be faked. It is not in her voice raised in anger, but in the way she can look someone in the eye and say, without trembling, no. It is not in the doors she slams, but in the ones she locks quietly and never opens again. It is in the peace she carries, knowing she does not need to be understood in order to be justified. The hidden power of women who walk away is not that they leave, it is that they never again abandon themselves. There is a moment, sometimes years after she has walked away, when the depth of her transformation becomes visible even to herself. She no longer reacts to the same words, the same tones, the same subtle manipulations that once tied her in knots. Where she once felt the urge to explain or defend, she now feels only stillness, not the frozen stillness of fear, but the grounded stillness of someone rooted in her own truth. Jung wrote that the integration of the shadow is the beginning of authentic power. For the woman who walks away, this integration is not a theory, it is lived experience. She has met the parts of herself she was taught to suppress, her anger, her refusal, her unyielding self-respect, and she has welcomed them home. These aspects no longer erupt in ways that sabotage her, they stand beside her as guardians. And those who encounter her now sense it immediately. There is no visible shield, no obvious armor, yet she is untouchable in a way that confuses those who would try to diminish her. The tactics that once worked, the guilt, the flattery, the subtle undermining, slide off her like rain on stone. She is no longer seeking her reflection in the eyes of others, so their distortions cannot change the way she sees herself. This is why her presence unsettles some. She is proof that a woman can withdraw her energy from what does not honor her and not only survive, but thrive. She carries a kind of sovereignty that cannot be given, only claimed. And this claim always comes at a cost, the cost of letting go of the comfort of familiar chains. But she knows now that comfort built on self-betrayal is nothing more than a velvet cage. There is also a quiet grace in her now. She does not speak with bitterness about the past, nor does she waste energy in trying to warn others of the people she once walked away from. She knows that each must meet their own shadow in their own time. Her work is not to save anyone else, but to live so fully in her own wholeness that she becomes an unshakable example of what is possible. And this grace is not weakness, it is the highest form of strength. For it takes far more power to hold peace in the face of provocation than to strike back. She understands that the true measure of freedom is not in the absence of challenge, but in the absence of control others have over her inner state. When she walks into a room now, she is not scanning for danger or approval. Her energy is not scattered outward, seeking to anticipate the needs of others before her own. Instead, her presence moves like a tide, steady, deliberate, impossible to pull from its course. People feel it even if they cannot name it. Some will respect it, others will try to break it. But she no longer changes her shape to fit what stands before her. And should an old face appear, one that once held her in the confines of their own comfort, she meets them not with rage or longing, but with a calm detachment that speaks volumes. She no longer needs closure from them, because she has given closure to herself. She no longer needs them to admit the truth because she knows it. She no longer needs them to see her worth because she sees it more clearly than anyone else could. This is the unshakable power Jung spoke of, the self that has walked through shadow and returned whole. The woman who has chosen her own soul over any bond that demanded she shrink to keep it alive. When a woman reaches this stage, she moves differently through the world. Not with the brittle edge of someone constantly guarding herself, but with the quiet assurance of one who knows she can never again be cornered in the same way. Her boundaries are no longer frantic walls built in reaction to harm, they are part of her architecture, as natural to her as the bones beneath her skin. Jung would say she has united the opposites within herself, the nurturer and the warrior, the listener and the one who says, enough. This integration radiates in ways that others feel instinctively. Some are drawn to it, sensing safety in her presence. Others are unsettled, because she is immune to the unspoken power games they depend on. Either way, she remains unmoved, because her worth no longer rises or falls on the tides of approval. In the past, she may have mistaken people's comfort for connection. She may have believed that keeping the peace meant she was loved, or that accommodating someone's every need would ensure her place in their life. Now she sees clearly, what is sustained by self-erasure is not love, but dependency, and dependency can turn as swiftly to resentment as it can to praise. Walking away has taught her the sacred truth of solitude. Not the aching loneliness she once feared, but the expansive space where her own voice echoes back to her without distortion. In this space, she is not too much or not enough. She is simply whole. And from this wholeness, she chooses differently. She no longer chases what pulls away. She no longer bargains with her boundaries in exchange for crumbs of affection. She no longer interprets someone's inability to meet her as proof that she should shrink. Instead, she allows those who cannot walk beside her to drift away, trusting that what remains will be rooted in truth. The people who enter her life now feel the difference. She does not audition for their acceptance. She does not translate herself into the version they find easiest to receive. She meets them as she is, unsoftened where she should be strong, unhidden where she should be seen. And if that presence unsettles them, she lets it. Because she has learned that her shadow, the very parts of herself she once feared would drive people away, is not a liability. It is her compass. It is what warned her in whispers when she was giving too much. It is what stirred in her gut when her needs were being dismissed. It is what finally rose in her chest and said, "We're leaving," when she thought she couldn't. In honoring that shadow, she has not become hard. She has become whole. And wholeness does not bend itself to fit into places where it must be halved. She knows now that the choice to walk away is not made once. It is made daily, in 1,000 small acts. In the messages left unanswered because they carry the same old hooks, in the invitations declined because they lead back to rooms she has outgrown, in the way she turns inward for validation rather than handing that power to someone else. And perhaps the most striking change is that she no longer seeks to prove to those she left behind that she was right to go. She no longer waits for them to acknowledge the harm, to recognize the loss. That hunger has dissolved. She does not need their recognition to justify her liberation. She is free because she decided to be, and because she did not turn back. There is a kind of silence that follows her now, not the silence of suppression, but the silence of a woman who no longer explains herself. It is a silence that speaks of inner ground too solid to be shaken by the tremors of someone else's discontent. Where she once filled space with justification, she now lets the truth stand without commentary. This unnerves those who once thrived on her willingness to plead her case, because they realize too late that her absence is not an invitation for negotiation. It is the final word. Jung would see in her now the completion of a great cycle, the return of psychic energy from the outer world back to the self. The energy she once poured into mending frayed connections now nourishes her own growth. The vigilance she once used to anticipate the moods of others now guards her peace. The love she once rationed to herself now flows without condition. And because of this, she no longer lives in reaction. She is not waiting for betrayal to prove her strength, nor for approval to confirm her worth. She is centered in a truth that does not depend on how she is seen. This is the essence of the female shadow redeemed. The parts of her once buried for being too much now stand at her side, lending her the kind of authority that does not shout, but cannot be ignored. To some, her departure will always be framed as abandonment. They will tell the story in a way that preserves their innocence, that paints her as the one who failed to hold on. But she no longer lives in their story. She writes her own, and in it, she is not the runaway, but the return to her own center, her own life, her own breath. She knows now that walking away is not a declaration of war, but a declaration of peace, peace with herself, even if it means conflict with others. It is an act that says, I will not make a home in a place that demands I leave myself at the door. And this peace is not fragile. It is fortified by every moment she resisted the pull to go back to what broke her. Her relationships now are not chosen out of fear of being alone, but from the desire to be met as she truly is. This means some circles grow smaller, but every connection grows deeper. Those who remain or arrive in her life know they are there because she chooses them, not because she needs them to fill a void she cannot face. And so she moves forward, not with the frantic energy of escape but with the steady rhythm of someone who knows the terrain of her own soul. The roads she walks now are not chosen for their safety, but for their truth. She does not fear the shadow on the path because she carries her own light and her own darkness, with equal acceptance. She has learned that the most dangerous woman is the one who no longer fears her own company. For such a woman will not stay in places that demand she betray herself to belong. Her leaving was not the loss of who she was, it was the arrival of who she was always meant to be.